Welcome to today's CLE, Limited Scope Representation and Alaska Free Legal Answers, Ethics and Pro Bono Opportunities. I'm Kara Bridge, the CLE Director for the Alaska Bar Association. I wanted to send a special thank you to the Unbundled Law section for co-sponsoring this CLE. If you have questions during the presentation, feel free to use the chat feature. We'll answer questions at the end of the presentation as time is allowed. I'll be emailing the certificate of attendance and evaluations this afternoon, so please check your email for those. Now, it's my pleasure to welcome today's presenters and my coworkers. We have Leah McKenna, Pro Bono Director, and Phil Shanahan, Bar Counsel with the Alaska Bar Association. Leah will begin the program with an overview of the Alaska Free Legal Answers, followed by Phil, who will be discussing the ethics of limited scope representation. And with that, I will turn it over to Leah. Thank you.
Thanks, Kara. So as Kara mentioned, I am the Pro Bono Director of the Alaska Bar Association. I'm also the administrator of Alaska Free Legal Answers. So I'm going to talk to you a bit today about how you can help Alaskans in need in just 20 minutes. I'll give you an overview of sort of the client side of the Free Legal Answers portal, and then also the attorney side and how to answer questions. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit about some other limited scope pro bono opportunities. Free Legal Answers is a website developed by the American Bar Association to help fill the access to justice gap for low-income Americans. It's a project that they developed nationwide in 2016. And the way it works here in Alaska and throughout the country is that low-income people can ask 3 civil legal questions per year if they qualify as being low income and meet the asset requirements, which we'll go over in a moment. On average, it takes about 20 minutes to answer a question, and volunteer attorneys are under no obligation to answer a question. This can be done anytime, day or night, 24/7, and every day of the year. The website that you would access for the Alaska site is alaska.freelegalanswers.org. The American Bar Association came up with this idea based on looking at the statistics about the access to justice gap. So as you can see from these statistics, LSC-funded organizations like Alaska Legal Services Corporation has to turn away about 50% of those that qualify for their services because they just don't have the staffing. And so that's where pro bono volunteers come in. And here in Alaska, we have these legal deserts where people who are low income live far from big cities where they might be able to get in-person free legal help through in-person legal clinics. And we don't have law schools here either that can help out with pro bono representation like we have in some other bigger cities in the United States. We also don't have a lot of big law firms that are able to scoop up these pro bono cases. So Free Legal Answers is an opportunity for a lot of people to provide pro bono service that might not otherwise be able to get that service. And what the American Bar Association found was that the vast majority of low-income rural Americans are using the internet. And so having a virtual legal clinic was a great solution to meet this need. So in 2016, the American Bar Association launched Free Legal Answers throughout the United States. There's currently about 39 states that have a site specific to their state. And there's also a federal Free Legal Answers site where users can post questions about immigration and federal veterans matters. So if you're an attorney who practices federal law, you might consider also volunteering for this federal Free Legal Answers site. Since the launch in 2016, over 400,000 questions have been submitted nationwide, and over 1,400 questions since 2016 here in Alaska. The clients have to be adults to qualify. They have to earn less than 250% of the federal poverty guidelines. So here in Alaska, that means about $49,000 per person, or about $100,000 for a family of 4. So that's a little bit broader than what legal services and certain nonprofits require. So we are reaching a slightly broader group of people. People also need to have less than $10,000 in liquid assets. They cannot be incarcerated. It needs to be a civil legal question, not a criminal one. And they need to be pro se. So if they have an attorney, they're not eligible for this service. The way it works on the client end is after visiting the site, they create an account. They get a confirmation email, they log back in, submit their question, and then they receive an automated response based on the category they selected, the type of question that they're asking. Then they wait for an attorney to respond to their question. It can take up to 30 days. They're notified of that in advance. And then after they receive the legal advice from the attorney, they have 10 days to ask follow-up questions on the site. So this is what clients see when they go to register about how to register and check back and post their question and check in for the response. The auto response that clients receive after they post a question has general legal information and self-help resources that's specific to the category of question that they're asking about. So this is a sample for a housing question. We have them for the different categories as well. We're actually working on developing and updating these auto responses. So if you're interested in helping with that, please contact me and I'm happy to get some assistance for all the different practice areas where we serve clients. If a client's not eligible for free legal answers, they can still get some self-help resources by going to other places to get help, which is linked on the Free Legal Answers website. And they can also visit that site while waiting for an answer. It's also just a very helpful site for our volunteer attorneys because we want in the responses for the volunteer attorneys to link to easily accessible legal resources where people can get answers to their questions after the initial question they post on Free Legal Answers. So my personal favorites are the Alaska Law Help site, which is the first one listed there. That's a website that the Alaska Legal Services Corporation put together, which has a wonderful array of self-help videos and links to forms and information in plain language about all types of common questions that self-represented litigants ask. In addition, the Alaska Court System self-help website has a huge array of self-help resources there, and of course, links to all of the forms that people might need. So when a client comes to ask a question, they select the category of the question. If they have a legal deadline or a court date coming up, they can post that so that they might get quicker attention. They need to add the name of the opposing parties and describe their question in 500 words or less. They can also attach files, they can attach photos or documents that they might want the attorney to review. And this is a pie chart based on nationwide statistics. It's roughly the same here in Alaska. So as you can see, about 38% of the questions are in family law. We also get a lot about housing and consumer and debt issues. The other category here in Alaska, what we're seeing a lot of too is constitutional rights and civil rights issues. Some of those are First Amendment issues. There's questions about discrimination. We get a fair number of employment and probate questions as well. And then some sort of tangentially related criminal law questions. So things like my friend got arrested and my belongings were in his house. How can I get them back? You know, now it's a crime scene and I'm not able to get that property back. So we get those kind of questions as well. When disaster strikes, the American Bar Association raises the limits on the income and assets requirements so that more people can get access to free legal help. And so that occurred during the COVID-19 pandemic and also during other hurricanes, fires, earthquakes that we've had. During the 2018 Alaska earthquake, we were able to get assistance from out-of-state attorneys who were able to help in applying for FEMA relief and other related questions. This is a slide that's also based on national statistics, and it's slightly different here in Alaska about when clients use the site most often. Here in Alaska, we seem to have more peaks around the time that we have our in-person clinics because we tend to advertise free legal answers around those times. And I'll talk about those clinics later, but generally those peak times are October, January, and May. Overwhelmingly, clients feel like this website is easy to use. They get helpful information from the attorney that's easy to understand, and they're relatively satisfied with the help they get. So it is a resource that is working for clients. On the attorney side of things, you basically just need to be licensed and in good standing in Alaska to register as a volunteer attorney. It doesn't matter what type of employer you work for, whether you're a solo practitioner or work at a large firm, or a government attorney. If you're a retired emeritus attorney, we welcome you. We are one of the qualified legal services providers recognized by the Alaska Bar Association. And so if you're an emeritus attorney, you can practice in this area. And Free Legal Answers really addresses a lot of the barriers to pro bono service that we often see. So I hear from a lot of people that they simply don't have time to volunteer. They've got personal obligations, or it's just hurting the bottom line of their firm too much to do pro bono work. And so because questions only take about 20 minutes on average to answer, those barriers are all overcome by this platform. So most people can find 20 minutes out of their day, once a week or even once a month to answer a question to help an Alaskan in need. In addition, there is malpractice insurance provided for free, and clients are informed that they are not going to be able to get full representation through this website. So they understand that they're not, you're just going to answer this question. You're not going to have an ongoing relationship with them. And in fact, the answers and responses that you post are anonymous. So clients are not even going to know your name unless you choose to include that in your response. In addition, some of you may work for employers that have policies that restrict pro bono work during business hours, but again, because this can be done anytime, day or night, you can still do this kind of pro bono work. Currently, we have about 80 volunteer attorneys in Alaska, but we only have maybe about 10 or 15 who are really active in answering questions. Nationwide, there's over 15,000 volunteer attorneys that have registered since the launch. So to get started with Alaska Free Legal Answers as a volunteer attorney, you visit the website, alaska.freelegalanswers.org, and click on attorney registration, and then you just follow the prompts. I then verify to make sure you're an attorney in good standing in Alaska, and then confirm that you can volunteer, and then you can log in typically the same day or within a couple days. And when you first log in, I really appreciate it if volunteers subscribe to categories by clicking on this Manage Subscriptions button. The reason for that is then you're notified of a new question being posted in your area of law. And that way clients aren't waiting too long to get an answer to their questions. It doesn't obligate you, it doesn't oblige you to actually answer the question, but at least you know it's out there and you can look at it and see if you have the time and the knowledge to answer that question. In addition, I send emails out periodically about the open questions that are available to answer on Free Legal Answers. These are the steps involved in answering a question. So after you've registered as an attorney, a volunteer, you log in, you'll be prompted to verify your status, and then you'll be taken to the available question queue. You'll see that there's a frequently asked questions page that you can click on to get more information if you kind of forget, if you haven't logged in for a while and you forget how it works. And then you can select a question from the subject column. And I'll go through that in a little more detail here. This is what the attorney question queue looks like. So as you can see there, you can see the kind of problem in that second column from the left. The parties involved are listed in the middle column, and the subject is on the right. So Phil will be talking with you more about ethics and how that applies to this portal. But this is where you can see those parties. And sometimes the subject line enough might indicate that off the top of your head, you're going to have a conflict with one of these parties. And if that's the case, you wouldn't want to take that question. You can sort questions by the type of client for veterans or seniors if you have a preference to answer those type of questions, and by the kind of problem and the importance of the problem, meaning whether there's a legal deadline or whether the person's been waiting for many days for an answer. And again, with the question, once you click on that subject line and you open up the question, you're going to see, again, the deadline, the description, which in this case, it's hard to read, but it says creditors are calling me in the middle of the night. And the details of, the additional details about the case. So this is an extremely short example of a question that might be posted. Many of them are much longer than this, but again, it's limited to 500 words for the question. They can also attach photos or files. So sometimes people do that. Often people include a case number too, so you can look it up on Court View and kind of see what the status is of the case if they haven't adequately described what the status is. And then when you are posting your response, this is what the portal looks like. It's basically similar to a Word document in terms of formatting. I recommend that you actually start, if you're going to be doing a lengthy response with lots of links to different resources and things like that, or if it's a multi-part response, which sometimes you do get multi-part questions, you can save it in a Word document, format it the way you want, edit it, and then copy and paste it into this portal. The portal does time out after a while. So if you don't save as draft, which is this button near the bottom, you might lose the work that you've done. And a lot of attorneys like to have easy reference to those questions that they've answered previously, or I should say to the answers, so that they can copy and paste it into other questions that are posed that have similar issues. You can also click on that button at the bottom that says, I want to return this question. So if you've clicked saying, I want to answer the question, but you don't answer it right away, and maybe then something comes up and you're going to be too busy to answer it, or you feel like you really aren't capable of providing competent advice to the person, you can return the question to the queue. But generally, we recommend just trying to answer it right away so that other attorneys can see all the available questions without having to wait for someone to return it to the queue. And I am going to jump in real quick and answer Kenneth's question about, can retired attorneys participate? So yes, if you are in emeritus attorney status, you can participate. So that means that you have to file an affidavit with the Alaska Bar Association saying that you want to volunteer, that you're in retired status and you want to volunteer with Alaska Free Legal Answers. And then you're able to do that here. So that's a great way to give back to the community for retired attorneys. And so continuing with the response, we do encourage people to include hyperlinks, and so that arrow is pointing to the symbol that you would use, and just like you would do in a Word document, you just highlight the word, click on that hyperlink button, and then add the URL that you want the client to be taken to. And usually you want to include hyperlinks to forms or other self-help resources. You can also attach forms to the document. A lot of us kind of think, oh, well, it's easy enough for them to find that form. But if you can just take the extra couple minutes to find the form for them, because they don't have the research skills that you do as attorneys. And so, and a lot of these people are stretched really thin in terms of their time. And so if you can take just a moment and make it a little bit easier for them, people really appreciate that. When you're in your portal, you'll see that right there in the middle of the drop-down menus, there's a link that says training resources, and that's where you can find links to training videos and tips for answering questions. And I'll go over some of those tips right now. So typically you can view the platform most easily by using Google Chrome. We do recommend that you read the question several times, especially if it's a particularly lengthy question. A lot of clients are not, they're not going to ask their question in a real articulate way. They're going to tell you all the facts about what's going on, and they're not even sure what their question is. And so reading over the question several times can really help. As I mentioned, you might want to copy and paste from a Word document for your answer. And when you're writing your answer, we ask that you write it at a 6th grade writing level. A lot of our clients are not well educated, and they're not going to understand if you're using a lot of legalese. We also want your tone to be approachable and friendly, and to start off your answer with a greeting like, "This sounds like a really distressing situation. Let me see if I can give you help." That can be helpful even if they have no options. So I think that just letting clients know that you hear them, that you feel some sympathy for them and some compassion for them can really be helpful, even if you don't have, even if the person doesn't have great legal options available to them. Again, using hyperlinks is helpful, and typically people are coming to this site because they either do not qualify for nonprofit legal representation and they can't afford an attorney. So they are representing themselves and they're going to continue representing themselves. So saying you should hire an attorney is not really an appropriate response. Now, sometimes if it's a very complicated situation and you really feel like they should see if they can get an attorney to help them, you might refer them to the unbundled section of the bar, or to the lawyer referral service through the bar, if you feel like that's necessary. In addition, if someone posts a really long, rambling statement and you're not really sure what they're asking for in terms of legal advice, we recommend you use if-then statements. So, for example, if someone's, talking about damage in their rental property, that they're renting out, and that, the landlord is threatening to keep their security deposit, you can say, well, if you're asking if they can keep the security deposit, then the answer is this. If you're asking if you can sue your landlord, then the answer is this. And you can just assume that they're asking, what are my legal options? In addition, when you finish your response, we encourage you to say something encouraging to them, like, I hope you find this answer helpful, best of luck to you, something along those lines. When you post your response, you'll also have the option of leaving the question open, which is generally what you should do so that they can come back with follow-up questions for 10 days. You can also, if something comes to your mind later and you think, oh, I should have said this, you can also go back and add more within 10 days. If you close the question, then there's no option to come back within 10 days. If you say, I want to answer this question, again, you have 3 days to answer it before it's returned to the queue. And if you have any questions or you're not sure if the answer that you're giving is sufficiently detailed or formatted correctly, feel free to email it to me. I'm happy to look over draft answers and give you some feedback. As the administrator, I can also see all of the questions and all of the answers. So, and we do that for quality assurance. I also move things around. If a client posts a question and they don't put the right category, I can change the category. So I'm able to see kind of everything going on there. But otherwise it is confidential and no one else is able to see those other answers that are given. As I mentioned, there is free malpractice insurance provided by the American Bar Association to all volunteer attorneys through NLADA. It covers only advice provided through the site. So we do recommend that you keep your advice limited to the site. As I mentioned, you don't even need to put your name in your response. you do have the option of taking a case pro bono that you see here if you want to, but you wouldn't be covered by the malpractice insurance through the ABA. If you do decide you want to take on one of these cases pro bono, just let me know. There is a button for that where it says contact administrator, and then one of the drop-down categories there is I want to take this case pro bono. So you can also, there's other options there for contacting me if you think that a question is in the wrong category, or the person's asking a criminal question, or appears to be otherwise ineligible to be asking the question. You can click on the button to notify the administrator about a question, and I'll look into it. Free Legal Answers also provides a great opportunity for mentorship and collaboration with law students, summer associates, and paralegals. So, you can have your staff research these questions, write up a draft answer, and then you, as the volunteer attorney, make sure it's all correct, verifies the links, polishes it up, and submits it on the website. We can also organize virtual or in-service projects related to this platform. So if you want to have a lunch where you invite all of your summer associates and junior associates and everyone, I can give a little presentation and everyone sits down and takes a question to answer. That's certainly something that we can do. There is an annual volunteer recognition through the American Bar Association, where they recognize pro bono leaders who are attorneys who answer 50 or more questions per year, and firms and corporations that answer 75 or more questions per year. So here in Alaska, Stephanie Rhodes, who I believe is here on this Zoom right now, she has won that award many, many times. She's our star volunteer and answers a huge number of questions every year. Dorsey and Whitney and Holland and Knight have also been recognized as pro bono leaders for answering over 75 questions from those firms. So thank you if any of you are here from those two law firms. Attorneys overwhelmingly like using the site, find it rewarding, say they're going to use it again, and they recommend it to other lawyers. So we find it's been a really successful project, both from the client perspective and from the attorney perspective. The Alaska court system has graciously agreed to help distribute flyers to all of the courthouses throughout the state. So about 22,000 flyers per year will be distributed. We are just at the very beginning of that distribution process. But because they have agreed to do this, and because it will be going to all the rural courthouses as well as the larger cities, we expect to get an increase in the number of questions posted. And so we really are looking for more volunteers because we don't want people to be frustrated and to have their question close out after 30 days because no one's able to answer it. And so that is what happens after 30 days. If no one answers it, I have to email the person and say, sorry, no one was able to answer your question. And that's it. So we really are hoping to build our volunteer pool. Currently, we don't have a lot of open questions. We've got some great volunteers who've been really snapping up those questions. So there's not a lot of open questions right now, but we are, again, anticipating that that's going to change very soon. And so that's all I've got on Alaska Free Legal Answers. And I want to turn now to the other limited scope pro bono opportunities. But actually, I'm just going to see real quick if there's any questions in the chat about Free Legal Answers. And it looks like there's an ethics question that I'll save for Phil. So I'm going to move on now to other limited scope pro bono opportunities. You can find all of these opportunities on our website at alaskabar.org/pro bono. We do update this website at least monthly, and we also send out pro bono opportunities in e-news. So these first few opportunities are clinics that are put on by the Alaska Bar Association along with our partners. The first one is the Elizabeth Peratrovich Legal Clinic, which we have coming up very soon on Thursday, October 16th. This is going to be held at the AFN convention, as it has been every year since 2011. And this is a general civil clinic where volunteer attorneys provide 30-minute consultations with clients who don't need to pre-register. They're able to drop in, and we get the vast majority of questions are in family law. We also get housing and land questions, public benefits, and employment and personal injury, the whole gamut. So if you're interested in volunteering for that, you can go to alaskabar.org/pro bono and scroll down to free legal clinics. You'll see we've got a Google form to sign up to volunteer there. And our next clinic is a new clinic this year. It's called the Elder Appreciation and Wills Clinic. And this is going to be held the following day during the AFN convention on Friday, October 17th. And at this clinic, elders can get a free will, power of attorney, and advanced healthcare directive written up at no cost. There's also going to be elder resources available from a variety of different organizations that will have tables there. So we're looking for estate planning attorneys for this clinic to handle the more complex cases. We will also be having a training for those of you who don't have estate planning experience. That training is going to be October 1st at noon. And at the clinic, there will be templates that attorneys will use. And so we're going to go over, Chelsea Ricola has volunteered. She's an estate planning attorney. She's going to be presenting this training, and we'll go over how to draft those documents. In addition, we've got our MLK Day free legal clinics, which occur every year on Martin Luther King Jr. Day. The next one's going to be on January 19th, 2026. And we've had these events every year for many, many years now. And recently they've been in Anchorage, Bethel, Fairbanks, and Juneau. And we may do it this year in Kenai as well. So if you're interested in volunteering, typically we open up volunteer registration about a month or so before the event. And you can keep an eye on your e-news for that, or alaskabar.org/MLK. Next, we've got Alaska Legal Services Corporation, which has some limited scope opportunities available, including phone consultations in the areas of family law and probate. Those take an hour. They also have a landlord-tenant hotline. Oh, and going back to those phone consultations, you can choose how many you want. If you just want one, that's fine. If you're able to handle more than one, you just let them know how many you want to do. And that can vary from week to week, month to month. However often you want to do it, they'll take whatever they can get. They really have a flood of clients that need pro bono representation. They also have a landlord-tenant hotline, and they provide training on that. That's 2 hours a month from 6 to 8 p.m. on a weekday evening, and it's forwarded to your cell phone. They also have a huge need for people to cover status conferences. Those status conferences are on Tuesdays and Thursdays from 9 a.m. to noon by Zoom. And so you could sign up for just one of those shifts or multiple shifts, whatever you are able to do. If you want more information about these opportunities, you can visit the Alaska Legal Services website. And you can also, again, click on the alaskabar.org/pro bono for more details. The Alaska Network on Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault also has a huge need for volunteers. They have full scope representation cases that they need attorneys for, but in terms of limited scope representation, they do have domestic violence protective order cases, and they also have a referral hotline that can be forwarded to your cell phone. Oh, and you can contact Katie Sudden by email or phone if you're interested in those opportunities. So that is all I have for now. I'm gonna look and see real quick if there's questions, and I see one here in the chat. If no one answers the question and it gets closed out, does that question count against the person's 3 questions per year? That's a good question. It does not. So the question, I withdraw the question and it does not count against their 3-question limit. Is there anyone else who has any questions? I can also take questions after Phil talks, but if you want to just unmute yourself and ask a question or put it in the chat, I'm happy to answer anything else about these opportunities. Okay, I don't see any right now, unless, well, I can't see everyone's hands. So if you're raising your hand, I can't see you, and you should just unmute yourself and ask it. But I think we'll go ahead and move. I'll pass it on now to Phil to talk about ethics of limited scope representation.
Thanks, Leah. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. I will be sharing my screen in a moment if Leah knows how to stop sharing her screen, and then I can, there we go. All right, and I'll throw mine up there if I can do it right. Let's see if I can make it work. Technology, let's see how it's going. Okay, so as I said, thanks for being here. One of the things, the reason we wanted to do this was also to ease folks' minds who might be worried that, well, what about conflicts? What about the ethics of just providing 20 minutes of advice to a client or something along those lines? So, if this is the unbundled section meeting, and a lot of you are unbundled, you're well aware of Rule 1.2C. Rule 1.2C is one of the rules that permits limited scope representation. It allows us to limit the scope of a representation if it's reasonable under the circumstances and if the client consents after consulting. Here, when they sign up for free legal answers, I'm talking more specifically about that today, they're given clear explanation that they are not getting a lawyer to represent them in their case. They are agreeing to limited scope representation. They're agreeing to get advice through the answer to their question. They're not continuing on to be a client of that lawyer later. That lawyer won't be showing up for court, et cetera. So the client is already agreeing by signing up for free legal answers to receive limited scope representation. The rule that's on the screen here that I threw up there just shows you that it still is supposed to be reasonable under the circumstances. The comment to the rule talks about that, and it says one thing to keep in mind, and I'm going to go to some other rules here in a moment, is that you are not excused from following the other rules of professional conduct, except we're going to talk about how conflicts are different in this world if you're talking about through free legal answers. So the next rule I'm throwing up on the screen, which I think is one that's really helpful in this context, is Rule 6.5 of the Rules of Professional Conduct. It allows a lawyer who's working under one of these programs, like Free Legal Answers or one of our clinics that Leah mentioned before, to provide services even though they don't have time to run a conflict check with their law firm. They don't have time to run the person's name through, and they're not expected to. What the rule permits is essentially a top-of-the-head sort of conflict check. As Leah mentioned, you'll see the names of the parties when you go into the portal. You'll see the questions that are presented, and you'll see the names of the parties. You'll also see a description, a brief description before you decide to answer a question. What this rule tells us, what 6.5 allows us to do, is handle that case if we didn't know that there was a conflict. It didn't ring a bell. It didn't seem obvious to us. Now, if it's a case where you see a name and you think, wait, that's my client's name, or that's the opposing party's name, we recommend just staying away from that one. Let somebody else answer it. Hopefully another volunteer will be able to step up and handle that one. What's good about the rule is essentially because a lot of lawyers were afraid, I think, to do these sort of clinics or free legal answers because they're worried, well, what if it turns out one of those people is represented by one of my other coworkers? And that's why subsection 2 of this rule, A2, talks about Rule 1.10, which is the rule that talks about how conflicts for one lawyer are imputed to the rest of their law firm, doesn't apply here unless the lawyer who's providing the services knows that another lawyer in their firm is disqualified. So again, it's more, what do you know off the top of your head? You're not expected to stop and run it through your conflict database to see if you have a conflict of interest in the case. So this rule was adopted. It started as an ABA model rule. our court adopted it because the idea would be we want to encourage as many folks as we can to help those who are lacking in the services they need because of the justice gap. And so this is one of those rules that gives lawyers some peace of mind to understand that if they decide to volunteer at a clinic or through a free legal answers program, they're not going to later get a complaint that they violated the rules of professional conduct because they had a conflict that because one of the partners in their firm was representing somebody or a former client was involved in the case that they never knew, but someone else in their firm had represented. So it provides some bit of a safety net there for lawyers. It's essentially, these aren't operating under a situation where you can run a conflict check, right? So it gives us some way to provide short-term legal services to a person in need without worrying that later you're going to be told you violated the conflict rules. Now, one of the things about the representations, both in this comment to this rule and in the comment to 1.2, does talk about, if the if providing very limited representation wouldn't really be reasonable, you can still offer some advice to the client, but you might still want to also say, here's another resource. Go call lawyer referral service or reach out to another resource that might be out there to get assistance. You don't want to just say you need to hire a lawyer because, as Leah mentioned, that's the purpose of them being here. They can't hire a lawyer. They haven't been able to. But you also have to be cautious about going beyond what you can answer when you decide to take on one of these questions. That gets me to this, competence, rule 1.1. The comment to 1.2 specifically mentions that an agreement for limited representation does not exempt a lawyer from the duty to provide competent representation, although the limitation is a factor to be considered when determining what the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation is necessary to accomplish that task. So in other words, if you're competent to do the limited scope representation that you've agreed to do, like answering this question in a brief answer that you're then going to not be involved in the case later, that's fine, but you should be cautious about making sure you do have the legal knowledge and skill to answer the question you choose to answer. Rule 1.4, communication, is another rule that I listed. This one, again, this is sort of as you're communicating with the client in the answer, as Leah mentioned, try to be as clear as you can using language that the client is likely to understand. This is a tougher situation than when you're meeting a client in person and you can sort of get the sense of, okay, what's the best way to communicate with this client? So what you're trying to do in these questions is give the client the reasonable information that they need, and explaining it to the extent reasonably necessary to the client. You still do have the duty to think about what's the best way to communicate with this client. This is another thing that I think you have to always remember too, confidentiality. So you are forming a very brief, but there is a client-lawyer relationship there when you answer someone's question on one of these at a clinic or through the free legal answers. So the duties of confidentiality still apply. And that again is mentioned in I think that's in 6.5's comment, in 1.2's comment. I believe both mentioned rule 1.6 as being applicable. So in other words, if you answer a question on free legal answers and it was an interesting one. There was lots of information that you thought, wow, that was really a unique situation. That's information you still have to protect as if it came from one of your other clients. It's confidential information. You can't reveal it to others without the client's consent, or if one of the exceptions that are listed in Rule 1.6 exist. I didn't list those here, but there are 6 permissive exceptions. And when I say permissive, I mean the rule says a lawyer may disclose information if one of those 6 exceptions applies. So again, keep in mind, this is still an attorney-client relationship, although it's a brief one. And it's permissible that it is that brief, but you do still owe the duty to protect the client's confidential information. What about 1.9? This one, some folks were worried that, well, if I take on this case, now I have a former client relationship with this person, and now I'm going to be precluded from taking on other cases down the road. And I think here what we have to remember is what really applies is Rule 1.9c. You don't have to necessarily worry about creating a conflict for your entire law firm if you answered a question on free legal answers or if you were at one of our clinics answering questions. But 1.9C, just like 1.6, is there to protect the client's confidential information. So what we're talking about here is that that client now, through the Legal Answers program, has become a former client. You have a duty to not use their confidence and secrets to their disadvantage. And you have a duty not to reveal their confidence and secrets, except if there was an exception that the rules would permit. So what about, here, what we were thinking about is, well, what if I did this? I didn't write down the name. They don't know who I am because I did this through the Free Legal Answers program. I didn't give them my name as the lawyer who answered the question. And then later, a new client comes to see my firm and we get hired, and my coworker takes on a case. And I think that sounds familiar. I wonder why that sounds familiar. Well, it could be from this. One of the things that I think, Leah, there was a part of the portal in the Free Legal Answers program that lets you track your questions, lets you track your hours, etc. You can actually go back. If again, it's sort of a top of the head. If it rings a bell, go back and look at your questions that you answered and figure out, did you answer a question for this person in this case? If so, 1.9C applies. Don't reveal that information to anybody else. And I would recommend you staying away from the case if someone in your firm decides to take the case. You would likely have to be precluded from representation on your end. It's one of the times when we aren't necessarily looking. 1.10 doesn't apply as the earlier rule I mentioned says, but you wouldn't want to then be involved in using and revealing client confidence and secrets. Should be precluded from doing so. So I think, the idea here is that we want lawyers to be able to provide as much help as they can through these short-term programs that we're providing to those clients who are most in need. So rules still apply, but they apply slightly differently in the conflict context, but they don't apply differently in the competence context or the confidentiality rules context. Again, now I'm going to mention Rule 6.1. This is one of our rules that recommends and that lawyers have a professional responsibility to provide legal services to those unable to pay, and a lawyer should aspire to render at least 50 hours of pro bono public legal services per year. I know that's hard. I know it sounds like a lot, but as Leah mentioned, we provide many opportunities to do so. Legal services and ANSVA have many opportunities to do so. The idea here, again, is to not scare you all away by saying, yeah, but what about the ethics rules? We're not suggesting you can do it willy-nilly and not be competent in what you're doing, but we are letting you know that there are ways to do this where you are protected from the conflict rules and how they would normally apply, but you're still able to help somebody who's in dire need. Back in 1993, our ethics committee also issued an opinion that talked about essentially ghostwriting pleadings for a pro se client. It says you can. There are those who, some states have said you couldn't. Some lawyers don't like that it says you can, but it's pretty clear in the committee's opinion, a lawyer may ethically limit the scope of his representation of a client, but the lawyer should notify the client clearly of the limitation of the representation, the potential risk the client is taking by not having full representation. When an attorney limits the scope of the representation, an attorney-client relationship is still created with the attendant duties and responsibilities called out in the professional canons. It goes on to say that it is permissible to assist the client, limit the scope to, I will help you draft documents that you will then have to file on your own. You make it clear to the client you will not be appearing in court with them. You will not be going to argue the motion that they're filing. You will not be there to sit outside the courtroom and answer their questions or sit in the back of the courtroom and answer their questions. But as long as you comply with 1.2C and it's a limited scope representation that the client has agreed to, that you have, that it's reasonable under the circumstances to agree to that limitation, then this ethics opinion gives us permission to provide services behind the scenes for clients who can't afford to hire a lawyer to represent them fully in their case. So I'm glad that Alaska has that opinion. I've had lawyers call and be unhappy that Alaska has that opinion, and I've had lawyers call and be very happy that we have that opinion. I think it's it's one that recognizes the need to serve those who just, number one, can't afford a lawyer or can't find one. One of the things that we in Alaska are struggling with is having enough lawyers. We have definitely run into a shortage of lawyers in a lot of areas. Even agencies that have money to hire lawyers aren't able to find lawyers who are qualified at times. So these programs and these rules that specifically help in the ethics world are useful to allow and encourage you all to think we can help, we can take the time. I know Stephanie Rhodes has done a ton for the program. Somebody should aspire to look at Rule 6.1 and say, I'm going to answer more questions than Stephanie this year. That would be a good goal. She gets honored a lot, and she deserves to be for that. But I think there are a lot of you out there who could spend that time. I think once you try this platform, you'll realize it's a platform that provides an easy way to provide service that you'll really feel good about. So basically, the next, I saw a question that came in. Somebody asked about if you took a case pro bono. I think this was the question. The intent of the question was, if I was on Free Legal Answers and I decided that I wanted to take the case pro bono, and I went through the steps to take the case pro bono, and then as I looked into it, I realized it was a contingent fee. It could be a proper case for a contingency fee. Can the lawyer do that? And oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Katie. I just now saw your I didn't have my chat open. Sorry about that. So the question was, would the client have to refuse to, the lawyer have to refuse to take that case on a contingency fee basis? And I don't think you would. I think as long as you were able to then explain to the client the purpose of the representation, why it's changed, why you think, look, I agreed to take this pro bono. A contingency fee case still doesn't require them to pay you out of pocket at the front end. So if you're explaining to the client, like you would any other client, what a contingency fee is and why you think this is a proper case for a contingency fee, I don't think there's an ethics rule that prohibits it. I don't know if the Free Legal Answers platform itself has any guidelines that it offers, but it sounded like Leah passed that question to me. So I thought it probably doesn't have any restrictions built into the program. And Leah, you've offered to show the page that shows the question history. Would you mind throwing, I'll stop sharing it. If you could throw that up there, that'd be great.
Okay. Okay, can you see that now?
I can see it on my end.
Yeah, so the question history is up here. This is after you've logged into your portal, and it's the second from the left. It says question history. You'll be able to see all of the questions that you've answered, and both what the question is and your own answer to that question. And then this is again the page where you can see just the parties' names and the subject line.
Right. Thanks, Leah. And that's what I was saying. If it rang a bell and you wanted to go back and say, did I answer this question before, or did I have some involvement with this case? That's one way you can log back in and check. And I think that's a helpful thing to have. Now, the other thing that comes up sometimes is you might not recognize the conflict. I said earlier, I was talking about looking at the subject, looking at the party names. Let's say you open it and you didn't realize that you might have some involvement or knowledge about the case, and then you start reading the client's 500-word description of what's going on, and you sense a conflict. Then just stop, return the question to the queue, and then still at this point you haven't provided any advice. But again, I would, when you're in this box here and you're looking at this area where their full description of the problem was, if that's where you start to realize, oh wait, I may have a conflict, don't answer the question, put it back into the queue. And remember that you still shouldn't be then running off and using that information. You still have an ethical duty there to not disclose that information. So I think it can happen. You might think that nothing rings a bell, but once that top of the head conflict is present, that's when you need to say, I'll decline to answer that question. And then somebody else who's signed up to be answering questions can pick it up for that client later. I apologize, I missed the questions earlier. Are there other questions that I can answer or that Leah can answer? We're both available.
At this time, if anyone has any questions, I've been monitoring the chat. There's no more additional questions there. But if anyone has any questions, they'd like to unmute themselves now. We do have a few more minutes.
I don't have any questions, but this is Stephanie Rhodes. And since I've heard my name mentioned several times, I just wanted to chime in about the experience and just tell people, you know, I started doing this after I retired because I really wanted to give back, and I had come out of the judiciary and I wasn't quite sure what I could do. And, you know, I didn't want to be on the pro tem list because I wanted my First Amendment rights back very quickly. So, you know, but here's the deal. It's really fun work, and it is, you know, I hope I do it well, but it's really fun work. It's better at this age to do this than do crossword puzzles. It's basically like getting a bunch of little law school exam questions where you think to yourself, wait a minute, I know the answer. I actually studied for this. So it means so much to the people you give the advice to. I mean, it's just amazing the kinds of feedback you get at the end that just make you feel like, I don't know why I haven't always done this. So I just want to put in a pitch for just dive in and just do it. It really is a nothing burger, and it is so important to those who need it. Thanks.
Thanks for
Stephanie.
chiming in.
Yeah. And we will have these materials available on our website, the slides and the other materials, the frequently asked questions about Alaska Free Legal Answers, and a one-page handout about the ethics rules that apply to the limited scope representation.
And of course, if you are involved in this situation and you have an ethics, you know, concern or question, you can always reach out to me, and I'll be happy to walk you through it so that you feel comfortable that, you know, you did it the right way, or that you can answer a question if you're worried about that, or you're worried about what to do after you answer the question. You're always welcome to reach out.
Are there any other questions from the audience? Hearing none. Well, I will just thank you all for attending today's CLE, and a special thanks to Phil and Leah for presenting today. Again, I'll just also pitch that we will be making this available, this video, on our website and through our video on demand catalog, probably early next week to get it up. But if you have other colleagues who might be interested in volunteering, please help us spread the word.
Hey, Kara, there's one more in the chat.
One
There's
question.
one more in the chat.
Oh, Leah tried to answer it.
I did try to answer it, but I'll do it out loud for the recording. So the question is, do you know the limits of liability of the insurance? I don't know the answer to that because the American Bar Association is the one that arranges the malpractice insurance through NLATA. You could contact the American Bar Association Center for Pro Bono, and they'd be able to answer that question for you.
Okay, one more time. Any final questions? I'll make sure I have my chat open correctly. No? Okay, well, thank you all again for joining us today, and have a great rest of your week.
Thank you all.